Hello, my name is Frank Buck. I'm the historian for the Alabama Music Educators Association, and I have two friends with me. I have Buddy Simpkins and his son David. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you doing?
All right.
You know, the Simpkins and the Sylacauga High School Band, it is a story that I think really everybody needs to know. David was band director at Sylacauga High School. He took the baton from his dad, Buddy, but the story gets better. Buddy took the baton from his father, Fess Simpkins. So we have three generations of Simpkins at Sylacauga High School. So today it's the story of really of that program, but even of Fess's journey way before them because things have changed so much. So, gentlemen, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Buddy, if you'll start us off telling us about your dad's journey.
Yeah. Well, Dad had started in the band because he was grew up in Pell City, and all of his brothers and sisters worked in the Avondale Mill there. And so they got daily a job down there helping the construction people, but he kept messing up, turning over barrels of cement or something they were working on. But they knew he had this lot of musical ability. He played the guitar and played for parties and fooled around with my granddad's clarinet. He was a chauffeur for the Avondale executives there in Pell City and the ones that would come there. He'd be gone by a lot of the time, so Dad used his old clarinet to learn to play it. But he kept messing up on his job, so Mr. Comer, who started Avondale Mills back in the 20s, he said, "Louis, you just mess up all this." He said, "We're going to put you in the band room." So in 1926, they sent him to Eufaula to do the band there at the Kayaki Mill, which was Avondale Mill. And there he met my mother and he stayed there for 4 or 5 years. And then he left and he tried out at Gulfport, Mississippi at the Gulfport Military Academy for a year. And so he didn't like being away from home. So he moved back up to Pell City, and the Sylacauga Band came open. He knew Frank Ray, who started the Sylacauga Band in 1936. And Frank was leaving in 1940 to go to Phoenix City. So Daddy came down, applied, and got the job here at Sylacauga High School. And so this was one of the few high schools in this area that had a high school band. And so many of the guys of a photo I have that I passed around to some of the ABA people a while, of the first, about 1940, of the first gathering of the band directors, Alabama Bandmasters Association started. And it's funny, 3 of the old band directors from Avondale in there. Eugene Jordan had the Birmingham Mills. Harry McGowan had the Mignon bands here, which was Avondale, where B.B. Comer is right now. And Frank Ray, who had been at Sylacauga, of course, we're going to Phoenix City, and Harmon Mims, who was a band director at Sycamore, Alabama, at the Avondale Mills. And so those were all the mill band directors. And of course, Dad took over the Sylacauga Band and was in that photo of the first beginning of the Alabama Bandmasters Association.
Yeah.
I remember Dad going over to Tuscaloosa. Everything they had in Tuscaloosa. And it's funny that I remember their names because Daddy was real close to them and good friends. And I was in the 7th and 8th grades. I can't remember who the president of ABA was those years. That would have been about 1950, 49 or 50. Mm-hmm. Daddy was vice president of ABA, and he took me over there. Daddy was over the all-state band. And so he would take me over, and he put me working with the director that was in charge of the white band. So I was in charge of helping set up chairs and do all the heavy work, moving around. But I remember at night, Frank, there were some band directors, and I wrote their names down in case I forgot one. But it's funny, I remember their names because they lived together in the old hotel. I can't remember what it was. You might remember. And they loved to play poker. and and some of those guys, I remember, you probably remember that Carl Swoko from Decatur, and Hollis Abrams was band director at Russellville, and Jim Cowart was at Athens High School, and F.C. McClure was at Old Coffee High School, which one I got to know pretty well, even after I moved to Tuscaloosa years later, was Tommy Hamner. And Tommy was band director at Tuscaloosa High at that time. And I did that for a couple of years with Daddy. He was in charge of that. So I got to know those directors' names real good. And then we lived right off of the main street here in Sylacauga, my growing up years when we moved to Sylacauga. And Daddy made real good friends with a guy named Johnny Long. And Johnny had to come through Sylacauga. After, in 1954 or 5, he took the job at Robert E. Lee High School. And he was moved, his mother and daddy, he had to come through Sylacauga to get to Hollywood, Alabama. I think that's right, where his mother and daddy lived. But he would always stop by our house in Mary Lynn, eat supper or lunch with us, whichever time we consume. So I got to know John real well, and they talked bands. I'd sit and listen to them talk. And then as I was growing up, got through high school, and David came along. We were real close with, when I first started teaching at Lincoln, Daddy was real good friends with Rip Reagan. And so Rip and John, you know, so I needed some of these guys that was really famous in the Sylacauga, Alabama Bandmasters Association. Their bands were great, and so I got listening to them. But you know, when I was finishing up at Lincoln, Jacksonville in my degree, even in 1959, there were so many high schools around that really didn't have a full-time band director, and so I took a year, my last year. I got married. I came home. My dad said, Mr. Bryant, the principal at Lincoln High School, had called, and he needed a band director. And he said, I needed a job. So I went and talked to Mr. Lincoln and the superintendent, Mr. Nunley here at Talladega County. And it was amazing what little they paid back then, 1959, Frank. And my dad knew people, and Daddy went with me to interview with Mr. Nunley. I tell people the story because I was going to teach part-time 1 year. Like I say, there was Rod Ferguson was at Hoax Bluff, Bill Lasmid, Glenn Cole, Melvin Morgan was at Munford, and Bill Lasmid was at Glen Cole. All these guys were still in college. We're still working on our degree, but we're teaching. And Daddy went with me to talk to Mr. Nunn, and for the first semester, he was going to pay me like $2,500 a year. And my dad put his hand on his head and looked up and said, God, Mr. Nunley, said, hell, I'll pay him that not to have to do that. and it was amazing how Mr. Nunley put his hands together and said, tell you what, Fess, I'll pay him $3,500, and then he starts full time in January, so we'll up that. So that was good. My daddy knew Mr. Nunley, but it's amazing how even then that a lot of schools didn't have full-time band directors. And
right. And the story you tell about not even having your degree yet, you're still in school. And I've heard that from so many of the people from in that generation, that you were actually out teaching, and I've heard it said that was some of the best education people ever had, because you're going out, you're teaching, you're learning, and then you go back to college the next day and you're asking some of those great names from our past, hey, I'm running into this in my band today. How do I fix this? Yeah. So it's just it's amazing.
It was amazing being a trumpet player and a drummer. I still remember a girl sitting there my first year, part-time. The girl looked up at me on clarinet. She'd been playing for 3 or 4 years already. She said, Mr. Simpkins, how do I play flat on clarinet? I said, I don't know. Just gonna, we'll have to look it up. But I learned quick, you do. But my dad, go back to him, Frank. I don't know, since David sent some pictures and a few articles there, and one of them, I don't know if you read it or not, but my dad, how he did it, I don't know, starting in 1940 and during still the war years. And he started the band at Columbiana. And he started the band at Childersburg. Hey, he'd go there 2 or 3 days a week or something, start. And another unique story in my personal life about that was I was teaching at Lincoln, and he had another name. Jimmy Ray Jones had taken the job at Holt High School, where Orland Thomas had taken a job in Mobile. They just started a new high school there. And so I got a call in August, about the 1st of August, getting close to time for school started, from the principal at Holt, and he needed a band director. And they had a good band. If you remember, Orland Thomas just said,
"Oh yes, yes."
And so but Mr. Hayes didn't know who I was. So he called Mort Glosser, who was a good friend of my dad's. He was band director, and at that time, superintendent of schools at Gadsden High School.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And but when Daddy was at doing the Columbiana band, W.W. Elliott, Woodrow Elliott, was the superintendent in Tuscaloosa County Schools. And so when Daddy had started the band, and so when he called Mort Glosser, wanted to know about Buddy Simpkins, he said, well, if it's Louis Simpkins, son, he ought to be all right. They didn't know if I knew anything about the band or not anyway. But Dr. Elliott thought that was great. So every time he'd bring somebody around Holt High School, he'd bring them down there, and he'd have to tell the band how when Daddy went over to Columbiana to do a PTA program, he had got to direct the band. I don't know. So it helps to know somebody that knows who you know. So that was an interesting story with Dr. Elliott, and he looked after me. And
all of these names that you mentioned, Mort Glosser and Orland Thomas, everyone, these are all some of the very best from the traditions in the past. And you had the opportunity to be around all these guys and learn from them.
Orland Thomas, great bands, and that was his home high school, see. So that was hard on me. When Colonel Butler used to tell me, said, it's hard to go into a place that's got a good band. You can go in there where they've had a bad band for several years and you build it up. Well, that's good. But to go in after somebody's done a fantastic job, like Orland did at Holt, because, it was a county school kind of out in the Mill Village area of Tuscaloosa at that time. And another one, alumni that if I'd been a few years earlier, I'd have taught Ted Galloway. See, yes. Ted came through that band under Orland Thomas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But then after, like I say, then after I went to Holt, I got to work with the all-state bands like I did with my dad. I was district chairman for a couple of years. And Jesse Jordan, if you remember, here's another name. He was a band director at Sheffield, I believe, back the years he was ABA president, and I was the district chairman of our district for a couple of years. They just put it on somebody that would do it, but I always enjoyed it, and then I got to work with all state band people and have our district contests and all state tryouts and all of that going on.
Yeah. And this whole time, your dad was at Sylacauga High School, as you
at Sylacauga,
and all, yeah. So
yeah.
how was that with you and your dad both being band directors at the same time, different high schools? Did you listen to each other's bands, critique each other's bands? Tell me about that relationship.
Well, of course, I didn't have a very big band at Lincoln. And that's what another story I can get into my personal stuff. Because when I went to Lincoln, I didn't know how to do a football show and we didn't have music you could buy then, Frank, as you know now, because if you want to play a tune at halftime with your band, you had to find an arrangement or write it. And my dad was good at that. And so in my first couple of years at Lincoln, when I'd have my concert band contest, I'd play some things that maybe Daddy had, and he'd bring about 15 or 20 of his band members up there and sit on stage and play with us. So it looked like I had a big band, and they played pretty good. That helped. So it was good having Dad as this close, where I'd come down on a Saturday afternoon and say, I need an arrangement for this song for next week, and we'd sit at the piano and Daddy'd sketch it out and all that. And so when I went to Holt, Frank, I didn't have Daddy I could run to all the time. And so one of the guys, I think he helped me as much as anybody in starting the band there at Holt, working with kids that Orland had. And there's a case where they were used to Orland and they didn't like, it's hard, some of them didn't like the way I was doing things. I was trying to do like Orland, which wasn't good. But what God helped me with around was Frank MacArthur.
Another name from the past, yes.
Getting my band ready for the marching season. We'd have a summer camp out at Camp Horn, a Boy Scout camp there out from Tuscaloosa. And Frank and Cliff Herter, if you remember Cliff.
Absolutely, yes.
Ran the Tuscaloosa Music Store, but he was a band director at Tuscaloosa High at one time too. But he and Frank would come out there and they'd help me tremendously. But then Frank would help me do arrangements for things. He wouldn't help me, he'd do them for me. And he made it so simple, Frankie. He'd say, what song, the song, he'd write out the melody for the song. And he'd say, well, let's let one of these do a little counter melody. And he'd say, oh, let's let the woodwind. And we'd sit there a couple of hours talking, and Frank would have me a good arranger. But so I was fortunate to know people that could do that. And better than I could ever done. So Frank was a big help. And so in the years there, they went well, Thomas. But the thing at Holt at that time, Frank, they didn't want to do football band. They said, what are we going to play for state contest?
Absolutely, yes.
So that put the pressure on me. So Orland had done such a well for years there. They hadn't gotten anything but 4 ones. Mm-hmm. And see, that put the pressure on me to do. Yeah. And fortunately, in the first 2 years, I did that. Mm-hmm. But the third year, I think I got a 2 on something. And that was terrible.
Well, for Holt standards,
yeah. Came back here to Sylacauga, the concert band wasn't the same. Places are different.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Every school is different. The kids have different things you can do with them. And I found that quick here at Sylacauga because me and James Thompson, here's another name, we talk about that because he had the same problem with Ellick City. He said, we go to the state contest and they want to know what time we're going to get back. Not where are we going to play good. They weren't worried. You couldn't get them fired up like a football team.
Right.
They say, well, we'll go over and play. What time are we going to get back? I got a date or I got this. So I didn't do as well here with the concert band, but it was a bigger band for one thing. And
that's something I always,
different situations, the way the kids thought about it.
Yeah, that's one thing I remembered about those Sylacauga bands of days gone by. I mean, you almost couldn't fit them on the stage.
Yeah. We played. That was another thing with ABAC. They put us in districts. Yeah. And the years I was district chairman in Tuscaloosa did well. When I came to Sylacauga, I got to be district chairman again. And I thought, well, why can't we have some bands in the concert contest come to Sylacauga? Well, I got to figuring it up. We didn't have but 2 or 3 bands in this area, Sylacauga, Talladega, Comer, maybe Childersburg. But then we'd have to go to Tuscaloosa, and we'd have 8 or 10 bands at Tuscaloosa. So it wasn't feasible to have the district contest in Sylacauga, or this area. So we always kept it in Tuscaloosa. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we had a big band. That's what the story I was going to tell you. So the ABA had a way you could play out of district. And so I would always go to Birmingham if possible. And so we playing one year at, I can't remember, the old Mountain Brook High School, maybe it was one of those.
Could have been, yeah, and, or Shades Valley, one of those.
I think maybe it was Shades Valley. Mm-hmm. When it was in the old school down there where Larry Deegan was band director for so long.
Yeah, Shades Valley, yeah.
But I had a big band, probably 140 at least kids.
Wow.
That's another story. I'll get back to that. But we followed a band that was small, didn't have a lot of chairs. I'm saying, then I got the chairs. Well, the chairman of their district was Ted Galloway. I'll go back to Ted. And so I got the chairs ready and all lined up, and I turned around, I was fixing to get up on the podium. And that was the year they going to give you so many minutes to get the band on stage. Well, I got them all set up, and I was fixing to get on the podium. Ted said, "Mr. Simpkins, your time is up."
Oh my.
Because it taking us too long to fix the chairs over there. But he laughed. He was just going on bigger than me.
Yeah.
We went ahead and played.
Well, that's amazing. Well, and then how many years were you at Sylacauga before you passed it on today? Because it was quite a few.
Yeah, I was there. Well, I was 4 years at Lincoln and 4 years at Holt, and then I guess 20 years here. I had 28
years. Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So I ended up with 36 years all total.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
And I let David have, because David had got married, moved back to Sylacauga, and they weren't paying him anything as assistant band director.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, well, I
like to Dr. Morton. I said, now if I'd retire, will you hire me back as his assistant and give him a good raise? Dr. Morton said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So
yeah,
I guess he paid you enough when he took over.
Well, I'd like to ask David, what's it like taking over from your father? Your grandfather was such a legend, and here your dad was a legend. I mean, 20 years in the program. What's it like taking over for somebody like that?
Well, let's see if I can get this fixed. Yeah. Well, gosh, frankly, I was just hanging on for dear life. So what happened? My quick story, and I'll make it quick because it's not nearly as interesting as what he lived through. But my undergrad degree was in arranging and composition at Alabama, and I worked under Steve Sample, and so I got out and I was playing in a rock and roll band, and I graduated. I was playing in a rock band. I was doing a little bit of songwriting and that kind of thing. And I had a couple of guys that I think my ultimate thought was after a couple of weeks out of school, I was going to make my move up to Nashville or something like that, and maybe get a job in a publishing company or, ASCAP or BMI or something like that. And anyway, Dad had a great old friend of ours, Gerald Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
Gerald was watching this. Hey, man. Gerald was Dad's assistant, and he got an opportunity to, and he was actually living with Mom and Dad because he needed a place to stay.
Didn't have enough to buy food.
Yeah, he was really starving, and so Mom and Dad were kind of took him in. This is my brother, kind of thing. And anyway, I came back from Tuscaloosa, and Gerald. Well, I guess at that point Gerald was living in an apartment or something. But we were over at the dinner table, and he said he had gotten an offer to go and teach, I guess with jazz over at West Alabama, Livingston. And it was a great deal for him, but it was in October, and this was like in the middle of football season. Anyway, our superintendent told him, said, "Well, if you can find somebody to take your place the rest of the year, I'll let you out of your contract." And I remember vividly, I'm sitting there at the kitchen table. I got this long hair because I've been playing in bars and stuff. And they both at the same time turned and looked at me and said, "What about you, David?" and I was so dumb. I said, "I could do that." And so I went and got my hair cut off, and so in the middle of October 1988, I kind of came in basically as a glorified substitute because it was going to pay a lot more than a starving musician, delivering pizzas or whatever else I was as a college educated guy without a job. But anyway, so I fell into it, and I the short story is I worked as hard as I could, try to uphold the standards of this guy, try to be as helpful as I could, and bring a little bit of what I'd learned over at Alabama, to the program, and try to be, contribute positively to it. And anyway, we always had this big end of the year party, picnic for all the teachers down at the park. And our superintendent walked up to me and said, "Dave, if you'll to consider coming on back, we'll go ahead and put you on an emergency certificate. You'll have to go back and get your master's and your certification, and we'll put you on full pay, full salary, full benefits, retirement, the whole 9 yards." I went, "Okay, I'll do that." And thus I became a band director. And so for the next 3 years, I was driving back and forth from Montevallo. Got to know your wife really well there. I checked first face I saw her every day was Devanya, and there for about 3 years. And I took most of my classes from those guys at Montevallo, and then I took a few at UAB. I think I had to commute back and forth, and thankfully they let me. I would take an 8 o'clock class. I could be back in Silicaga by about 10 o'clock. Teach the rest of the day. Then I'd jump in the car and run back over there for an evening class. So anyway, I finally finished in 91 with my master's, and came on, and then I guess about 94 or so, 94, 95 is when you retired.
95, yeah.
95. And then we went ahead and just traded places.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And the thing that strikes me through everything you're saying, it's just people knowing other people and working together. Buddy, as you talk about all of those names, Cliff Herder, Mr. Swoko, Johnny Long, on Orland Thomas, on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I grew up in Tuscaloosa. I grew up in Northport, and in junior high, I remember going over to the Freedman Library, and there was this recording of the Holt High School band that Orland during Orland's last year, Fanfare and Allegro.
Yeah.
And I think I wore that record out, checking it out so many times.
Is that right? Yeah.
Orland's
a wonderful band now.
Absolutely, yeah. But all of the things you're talking about, as far as the connections and kind of who helped you move from job to job, and who put in a good word for you, and who helped you along as you got started, and then, I think that's so important for those of us today when we're trying to figure out how do I have a good band? Well, you do it by having a community, and you have it by helping other people have a good band, who in turn are helping you have a good band. And that rising tide just lifts all the boats.
Right. If I could chime in on that thought, I've told Dad before, I throughout my career, I put 25 years in, and but I always felt a little jealous of him in a way, because I always felt a little bit handicapped in a way because I was an arranging major.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up having all these arranging classes with these amazing people, but I didn't really get the network of music ed people that I knew. I didn't really know a lot of people when I actually started teaching, and I had to kind of learn on the fly. And of course, you know how it is, once everybody's got jobs, everybody's busy with their own programs. And I did have some guys besides Dad that I love to call on and pick their brain. Jim Duran was the number one.
Oh my, yeah. What a
Jim,
legend.
so good to me. And Chris Cooper over the Homewood guys, and Ron Pence and all those guys. Those are like, I just love them so much, and they helped us out. But I always felt like I was always envious of Dad. He had like 100 people he could call in a heartbeat to. They all had similar experiences, and were just so eager and ready to jump in the car and drive down here, or he would help them out. It was amazing to hear these stories. So,
yeah, it definitely is. Oh,
He did a good job with the band. He had more musical talent than me, understanding theory and stuff. I couldn't arrange Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with a good arrangement. It just wouldn't come out very good. That's why I'd run to Daddy or Frank MacArthur or somebody I knew that could do that. And I got through Steve of Sample's arranging class somehow, because I played in his dance band every Saturday night. We played at Indian Hills Country Club. I was the drummer. So I think I fit out of pity, he got me through the arranging class.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Well, guys, this has been great. This is fascinating, and this is the kind of story that that we all need to hear. And those of us today, we need to know how it was back then, because what you guys did, that's the reason we have what we have today.
Well, I don't know, but Daddy, these names I called earlier, Swoko, he really idolized Swoko.
Yes.
But these other guys, Bodie Hinton was close to Daddy. And that's a story when Daddy loved Auburn. And so they had a guy 1 year down there, Bert Leitner, that was a band director for 1 year. And I thought the world, in fact, I played in a band 1 year at Auburn. And Tommy Goff, I was walking across campus and I ran into Tommy Goff and he said, come on with me. And he took me over and made me try it. And I played bass drum in the Auburn band and trumpet in the concert band. But Daddy loved Auburn. And so when the job came open, he called Dr. Liverman, who was over the music department at that time, said, you're going to need to hire Bodie Hinton, who had left Tuscaloosa High School at that time, worked for Buddy Lively's music store, Yeah. And Mr. Lively said, Fess said, I don't know Bodie Hinton, and he hadn't applied for the job. Daddy said, Dr. Liverman, stay right there by your phone and he'll call you in just a minute. Daddy hung up and called Bodie and said, you call Dr. Liverman and tell him you don't come over there for an interview. And so that's how Bodie got the Auburn job. Daddy got all the band directors to write a letter to Dr. Liverman to hire Bodie Hinton.
I had no idea.
And so Daddy and Bodie, they were close.
Yeah.
And leading that up, I left Auburn and went to Jacksonville the next year. And we made such a close knit of band friends in the music department. Rod Ferguson, Wayne Washam, Frank Bootenshawn, if you remember Boots.
Yes, very well.
And that's so many of us that are still best of friends. Washam and I and Rod, we talk, Bill Lazenby, we talk at least every week or two, we stay in touch with each other.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's good.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thanks again. Fascinating story. Thanks for the people who are tuning in. So thanks to Buddy Simpkins, David Simpkins, remembering Fess Simpkins. And again, this is Frank Buck, historian for the Alabama Music Educators Association.
Thank you for doing this, Frank. Hope it's okay.
All right.
All right.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.